On October 14, 1944, Erwin Rommel told his 15-year-old son that he had 15 minutes to live. Hitler had sent 2 generals to their home with an ultimatum: take cyanide or face a show trial that would destroy your family. Rommel chose the poison. But here is what makes this story different from every other Nazi downfall. That 15-year-old boy would spend the next 70 years transforming the Rommel name into something his father's regime would have despised. A symbol not of military conquest, but of tolerance, reconciliation, and liberal democracy. To see more profiles on the figures of World War II, subscribe and hit the bell. October 14th, 1944 began like any other day at the Rommel Villa in Herrlingen. Erwin was recovering from severe head injuries suffered when Allied aircraft strafed his staff car 3 months earlier. He walked with difficulty, his left eye would not fully close. But he was alive, and that had become a problem for the Nazi regime. At noon, 2 generals arrived, Wilhelm Burgdorf and Ernst Maisel. They were not there to check on his recovery. Rommel met with them privately for nearly an hour. When he emerged, his face showed nothing. He walked upstairs to find his wife Lucie, and what he told her would make her a widow within the hour. Then he found Manfred. He explained that dying by the hand of one's own people was hard, but the house was surrounded, and Hitler was charging him with high treason. The accusation connected him to the July 20th plot, the failed assassination attempt against Hitler. Rommel had known some of the conspirators. Whether he was directly involved remains debated by historians, but Hitler had decided he was guilty, and Hitler's decisions were final. Rommel laid out the choice he had been given. If he took the cyanide, his death would be announced as complications from his injuries. Full state funeral, military honors, his family would be protected, their pension secured. But if he refused, if he demanded a trial, everyone he loved would face the consequences. The Nazis had made clear what happened to the families of traitors. At 12:15, Rommel told his son he would be dead within 15 minutes. Outside, Gestapo agents waited in the woods surrounding the property. If Rommel tried to resist or flee, they had orders to shoot. The cyanide was not really a choice at all. It was a performance of choice, designed to give the regime deniability. Rommel put on his Afrika Korps jacket. He picked up his Field Marshal's baton. He said goodbye to his wife and son, then walked to the waiting car with Burgdorf and Maisel. They drove a short distance down the road and stopped. At 12:35, the phone rang at the Herrlingen villa. Rommel was dead. The official cause would be listed as a brain embolism stemming from his July injuries. A 15-year-old boy now carried one of the war's most dangerous secrets. Germany's most celebrated general had been murdered by his own government, and speaking that truth could get his entire family killed. The state funeral a lie. 4 days later, tens of thousands lined the streets of Ulm in silent salute. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt delivered the eulogy, praising Rommel's devotion to the Führer and the fatherland. The coffin was draped in the Nazi flag. Military bands played. It was one of the grandest state funerals of the war. Every word of it was a lie. The Nazi regime gave Rommel full military honors while concealing that they had forced him to commit suicide at gunpoint. They praised his loyalty while having just accused him of treason. They celebrated his service while his body still contained the poison they had made him swallow. Lucie and Manfred stood at that funeral knowing the truth. They watched the crowds weep for the fallen hero. They heard the speeches honoring a man the regime had just murdered. They could not speak a word of it, not because they were cowards, because the same men who had killed Erwin would kill them too. The protection they had been promised, the pension, the safety, depended on their silence. Speaking meant dying, and Rommel had taken the poison specifically so they would not have to. The truth would have to wait. The teenage witness speaks. 6 months later, the war was ending. French forces swept into southwestern Germany in April 1945. Manfred, now 16, had been conscripted into the Reichsarbeitsdienst, the Reich Labour Service. As Allied forces advanced, he made a decision. He deserted. The French captured him anyway, along with thousands of other young Germans. He was processed as a prisoner of war and held for interrogation. But his name caught someone's attention. Rommel, the son of the Desert Fox. General Jean de Lattre de Tassigny, commander of the French First Army, wanted to speak with him personally. De Lattre had fought against Rommel in North Africa. He respected the Field Marshal's military ability, even as an enemy. Now he wanted to know what had really happened in October 1944. Manfred could have stayed silent. He could have repeated the official story about brain complications. He was 16 years old, a prisoner of war, surrounded by the forces that had just conquered his country. He had every reason to say nothing. Instead, he told the truth. He described the generals arriving at noon, his father's calm explanation of the ultimatum, the choice between poison and a show trial, the 15 minutes, the waiting Gestapo, the phone call confirming death. His testimony became one of the first credible accounts confirming that the Nazi regime forced suicides on its own officers. The boy who had watched his father die became a witness for history. By August 1945, he was released from the prisoner of war camp and returned to his mother. Manfred's disclosure revealed Nazi brutality to the Allies in a way official documents could not. A teenage boy, describing his father's last morning in plain language, carried more weight than any intelligence report. But there was another secret the family had guarded for decades, one that would not emerge publicly until 2001. It would complicate the carefully constructed image of Rommel as the noble general with the perfect private life. The secret daughter. In 2001, a Sunday Times investigation uncovered personal letters that revealed something the Rommel family had kept private for nearly 90 years. Erwin Rommel had fathered a daughter in 1913 before his marriage to Lucie. The mother was Walburga Stemmer, a fruit seller in Weingarten. Their relationship was serious enough that Rommel proposed marriage, but his family objected because Walburga was not considered suitable for an ambitious young officer. The relationship ended, but the child, a daughter named Gertrude, remained. They did not abandon Gertrude. Instead, she was introduced to relatives as a cousin, and she maintained contact with the family throughout her life. She visited Lucie and Manfred regularly, even after Erwin's death. The connection persisted for decades. Walburga died in 1928, officially of pneumonia. Historians who have examined the circumstances suspect suicide, believing she was in despair over losing Rommel to Lucie and over the life she might have had. The revelation did not destroy the Rommel legacy, but it added complexity. The general whose image was carefully managed during the war, the honorable commander and the devoted family man, had a hidden past that the regime's propaganda machine would never have allowed. The Rommel myth was not just military propaganda. It extended to his private life. Gertrude outlived them all. She died in 2000, just before the Sunday Times investigation made her existence public. She went to her grave knowing who her father was, connected to his family, but never publicly acknowledged. Lucie's 27 years of silence. Lucie Maria Rommel survived her husband by 27 years. She lived through the occupation, the division of Germany, the economic miracle, and the long process of coming to terms with what her country had done. Born in 1894 to a Polish-Italian family, she was educated in Danzig and spoke multiple languages. She had been more than a general's wife. She was an intelligent woman who understood exactly what was happening around her. She knew what the regime had done to her husband. She knew what they were capable of. After the war, she faced the peculiar burden of being a Nazi general's widow in a country trying to forget that Nazism had ever happened. Denazification courts examined everyone connected to the regime. Former generals' families faced scrutiny, suspicion, sometimes prosecution. Lucie navigated all of it. She never wrote memoirs. She rarely gave interviews. She did not tour the lecture circuit defending her husband's reputation or attacking his enemies. She simply endured. Her silence was not weakness, it was strategy. Speaking would mean becoming part of the story. It would mean defending, explaining, justifying. Lucie chose instead to let her husband's military record speak for itself while she raised her son and lived as private a life as possible. She died in 1971 at the age of 77, having watched Manfred grow from the traumatized teenager who witnessed his father's death into a respected political figure. Her quiet endurance became its own form of testimony. A woman who chose dignity over spectacle, who bore an impossible inheritance without being crushed by it. When Manfred eventually rose to prominence, he carried not just his father's famous name, but his mother's example of how to live with history's weight. The son who inverted the legacy. Here is where the story takes its most unexpected turn. Manfred Rommel could have hidden from his name. He could have changed it, left Germany, started over somewhere his father's shadow would not follow. Many children of Nazi-era figures did exactly that. They disappeared into ordinary lives, their famous names buried under married names or new identities. Manfred did the opposite. In 1974, he ran for mayor of Stuttgart and he won. He would hold that position for 22 consecutive years, becoming one of the most respected political figures in modern German history. But he did not just survive in politics despite his name. He used it, not to glorify his father's era, but to deliberately repudiate everything it represented. He championed immigrant integration when many German politicians opposed it. He founded the Stuttgart Pact for Integration, bringing together government, businesses, and community organizations to support newcomers. He tolerated dissent. He promoted reconciliation. He built a political career on precisely the values the Nazi regime had tried to destroy. Then came 1977. The Red Army faction, West Germany's most feared terrorist group, kidnapped and murdered industrialist Hans Martin Schleyer. In response, the German government took a hard line. When several members of the Red Army faction died in Stammheim prison that October, officially by suicide, their bodies needed burial. No cemetery in Germany would accept them. Local governments refused. The terrorists' families could not find anywhere to lay their dead to rest. Manfred Rommel, son of Hitler's Field Marshal, authorized their burial in Stuttgart. The backlash was immediate and fierce. Critics accused him of honoring terrorists. His political opponents called it a betrayal. How could the son of Germany's greatest military hero give sanctuary to the bodies of murderers? His reasoning was simple. Reconciliation requires acts of reconciliation. The dead were dead. Their crimes were over. Refusing to bury them would only perpetuate hatred. Someone had to end the cycle, and he was willing to be that someone. It was exactly the kind of decision his father's regime would have despised, and that was precisely the point. The Rommel name became associated not with Nazi Germany, but with its deliberate rejection. The son inverted everything the father's era represented, not by running from history, but by facing it directly and choosing differently. The airport and the transformation complete. In 2014, Stuttgart made a decision that would have been unthinkable in 1945. They renamed their airport not after Erwin Rommel, the famous general whose tanks swept across North Africa, not after the Desert Fox, whose military reputation had survived even as his regime crumbled. They renamed it after Manfred Rommel, the mayor. The city said that Manfred Rommel represented tolerance, reconciliation, and openness to the world more than anyone else in Stuttgart's modern history. Those were the values they wanted their airport to embody. Think about what that means. In 1944, the name Rommel represented Hitler's war machine. It appeared on propaganda posters. It was celebrated by a regime that murdered millions. It belonged to a man who led armies of conquest across 3 continents. 70 years later, the name Rommel was being honored again, but for the exact opposite reasons. For tolerance instead of conquest, for reconciliation instead of division, for openness instead of authoritarianism. The son's legacy had eclipsed the father's by inverting everything it once represented. An airport named Rommel, but for reasons no one in 1944 could have imagined. Manfred died in 2013, 1 year before the airport was renamed. He was 84 years old. He had spent his entire adult life demonstrating that a name does not determine a destiny, that what you inherit matters less than what you choose to do with it. The paradox of transformation. The Rommel family story inverts expectations at every turn. A forced suicide meant to silence a potential traitor instead preserved his legacy because the Nazis lied about it, and the truth eventually emerged anyway. A 15-year-old witness who should have stayed silent became history's truth-teller, confirming Nazi brutality to Allied interrogators when he could have simply repeated the official story. A widow's silence became dignity rather than complicity. She endured without defending, survived without explaining. A secret daughter complicated the carefully constructed myth, but did not destroy the family that quietly acknowledged her for decades. And a son transformed a Nazi name into a symbol of liberal democracy. Not by running from it, not by hiding from it, but by doing the opposite of everything it once represented. What happened to Rommel's family after World War II was not destruction. It was not disgrace. It was not the generational collapse that befell so many Nazi-connected families. It was transformation. And it happened because a teenage boy who watched his father die at the regime's hands made a different choice about what to do with what he had inherited. He could have let the Rommel name die with his father's generation. Instead, he spent 70 years making it mean something new. Thanks for watching. If you found this story compelling, check out our other deep dives into the families who lived in the shadow of World War II, their choices, their silences, and the legacies they built from the ruins. Like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell for more History Inside.